This is Cow, the podcast. Yeah, hi there and welcome. I'm Ant Biggs, this is Cow, the podcast, when the conclusions don't fit. Finally back, and apologies for the delay to this episode, but I'm decided to try and keep things a little more snappy. Half the content, twice the value. Thanks for your support, everybody, and hope you enjoy. Yeah, hi there. Back to writing again then, after a bit of a roadblock. Not the terrifying writer's block that I'd thought it might be, more a stop at the services to refuel cognitive dissonance, I believe. I write, ultimately, yes, to make money, but the real driver is a thirst for knowledge, a quest for truth. I guess like scratching an itch, picking a scab. Something about writing that not only means you're communicating your thoughts, but that you're also forming them at the same time in a two-way process. It's not simply me putting what I think on paper. And going public means I need to be pretty clear about what I'm saying. I have to refine the ideas, understand what I'm saying. And because of that, the ideas develop on the paper. So the writing helps my thinking and vice versa, in a kind of loop. What happened last time I finished an article was that I was left in a little bit of shock with an understanding that left me properly uncomfortable. If I'd written the next piece straight off the bat there, I'd have been close to cheering the achievements of L. Ron Hubbard or Nazism, even close to prescribing some form of totalitarian cognitive mind control, on the cusp of advocating some form of neuro-linguistic brainwashing cult. Check out NLP. So I was terrified of where my train of thought appeared to be taking me. And why? Because all the last piece really did was attempt to map my own philosophical journey, the assumptions and discoveries I'd made along the way and what I'd found up to then. But it turns out that at the end of my philosophical journey, I'd been proven fundamentally wrong. And I'd come to within a hair's breadth of coming to terrifying conclusions out of that. It didn't feel right. I had to digest it. The trouble with this personal stuff is that if you're going to stick to this idea of your writing, then there's no one else to blame if it doesn't come out as you expect it to. To set this up then in some sort of context, when the idea of writing began for me to germinate, I guess I had an instinct for a philosophical question and an instinct that what we see and hear and experience in this world might be nothing more than an illusion. And I was desperately looking for some moral structure in the world, something to found the house on. House of cards maybe, or sand maybe. I'd stumbled upon the grounding problem. But I had this idea about mapping my cognitive landscape as a way through the crisis. I guess at the time I might even have been able to kid myself that I knew what I was talking about. But now looking back, I'm not even sure I could have defined even what the crisis was. I was attempting to find some sort of certainty, but the search led me away from it. But bizarrely enough, whilst I've seen my position dissolve before my very eyes, it's been a liberating experience and it's felt physically good. If we understand the purpose of philosophy is to determine how we should live, then I'd taken a position as a fan of science rooted in the Enlightenment, in rationalism. I didn't know it, but it was pretty much part of my DNA. I believed, as many do, that we have the capacity to stand apart from our own bodies, that the exercise of reason and a basis of objective truth will provide us all the philosophical or ethical answers we need to all the great questions we can face. An article in The Guardian recently equated this belief system with the political left, and that was something that pleased me, but at the same time it disappointed me with its arrogance. We all need to learn to think in new ways. Descartes, you'd think, with this I think therefore I am thing, provides enough grounding for a lifetime, or 300 years he has. And that was my go-to position on consciousness, existence, the whole lot. It's only from this that the idea comes that given the right information, our rational selves might equip us to understand the truth. This enlightenment specifically challenged our grounding in God and subjectivity and went in search of our objective universe. But Descartes' I demands a thinking I that is rational, able to observe and navigate, to reason. It demands that self the ability to control its environment and the body that it inhabits. Now, we're all products of the Enlightenment success, not separate rational beings, though, but bound in a world where the scientific rational narrative has become real. Rationality has displaced God, yes, but for many, it's only resulted in being an alternative belief system. Gone the personal inquiry and experimentation, instead the belief in putting man's rationalism above his animal brain. The animal brain as posited by Spinoza, and by extension putting man above woman, etc., etc. An ever-evolving hierarchy of turtles all the way down. It puts man over the animal kingdom, over plants, the land, and the rivers, etc., etc., placing man's consciousness as somehow closer to God and truth, saying even the biggest questions of the universe will give up their mysteries once we're ready for them. I mean, this is a strange but arrogant assumption, and we should be aware of the irony. Let's unpack it. Let's say our brains are sufficiently rational to make the right decisions. Let that sink in. Because how do you know that? Because if you're going to argue that something is right, and I'm referring here to the idea that the left is better based to understand truth because of its belief in science, or that rationalism is somehow closer to an objective truth. If you argue this just because you know it to be so, then all you are doing is arguing that a subjective belief is a valid basis for all ethical judgment. And if you do that, that means that all ethical judgments can be philosophically true or equally valid. They only require someone to believe them to be so. It might be someone else. I mean, this means you're just arguing for an opposition. It's dodgy territory. How we end up proving that black is white and getting ourselves run over at the next zebra crossing. That was Douglas Adams, by the way. And I'm not going to go into the depths of it here, trying to keep this short, but I'm going to show you the evidence or the theories that now begin to take the carpet from under the feet. Maybe it's unfair to point to this logical confusion because, yes, the scientific method at its core at least attempts to remove subjectivity from its inquiry. And it's by far the best method we have to know anything, but it's a totally different thing to attempt to remove subjectivity from an inquiry and to actually do it. And what many are now missing in blindly defending the validity of our objective truths, so valued by our enlightened 17th century philosophers, is that this project has arrived at its very own crossroads. Science is moving on and getting itself hoisted with its own petard. The further we get in our search for an objective reality, the further it seems to move away. We think of ourselves as separate, godlike creatures, separate from the reality we observe, rationally picking and choosing a nice colour or a better pair of shoes, or between an abstract good and evil. But as people like George Lakoff maintain, cognitive science, first emerging in the 1950s, has come up with a number of challenges to this worldview. Here are some of them. The brain is embodied. It would have no function without a body. The body senses the world according to subconscious demands. Our minds are not fast enough to see the world as it happens. We project and model what we expect to see. We communicate reality through a constructed narrative. This narrative is learned by strengthening and weakening neural networks in the brain. And MRI scans show these networks functioning in the brain. The narrative serves to protect and enable the body. Behavior is based on this narrative alone. 98% of our behavior, if not more, now is thought to be unconscious. Most of what we do originates in the animal brain. Our rational brain has limited to next to no power to control ourselves. Now, the brain talks to the environment through the body. To think otherwise, that the brain is somehow independent, a privileged entity just receiving the info and processing it, is to have some distorted view of the game that it's actually playing. It's not just receiving input, but it's going out there and sampling the stuff under the control of all the imperatives that having a body implies: hunger, thirst, warmth. Senses don't just make sense of simple reality. The world is full of ambiguity. Our brains look for supporting evidence to make sense of stuff. We actually actively choose where to look, choose what to pick, which bits of the puzzle we want to see to make it fit with what we know. Through this, the cognitive sciences are beginning to reveal the extent to which we are incapable of this rationalist separation. It was this realization that I'd found difficult. And by extension, the way we're controlled and might control others through language programs. We think in terms of typically unconscious structures called frames. These include semantic roles, relationships between roles, and relations to other frames. Think of a hospital. It's a frame in the brain with its relationships and roles and links to other frames. And it includes doctor, nurse, patient, visitor, operating room, scalpel, etc. And specifications of what happens in there, the relations between the roles, those are included too. Doctors operate on patients in operating rooms with scalpels, etc. Now, these structures are physically realized in neural circuits in the brain, all sparking off in regular patterns, linking with others. All our knowledge makes use of frames. Every word is defined through the frame it triggers. As I speak doctor, so my framing fires. And as you hear it, so the same to you. It can be measured on MRI scanners. All thinking and all talking involves this framing, even the Enlightenment project. And since frames come in systems, a single word typically activates not only its defining frame, but also much of the system its defining frame lives in. And more than that, many frame circuits have direct connections to the emotional regions of the brain. So whilst we attempt some form of rationalist separation, it turns out, are an inescapable part of normal thought. You cannot be rational without emotion. Emotion provides the meaning, and without emotion you would not know what to want, since like and not like would both be meaningless to you. And where there's neither like nor not like, nor any empathetic judgment of the emotional reaction of others, you cannot make rational decisions. So where did that leave the Enlightenment search for the objective? Where did that leave Project Rationalism? After the last episode, I'd been excited to open up about how we think in metaphor, about the effect our use of language has on those metaphors, about how it's all bound up with the way we behave, and about how we can change our minds with careful programming. The logic was this. Since political or ethical ideologies are, of course, characterized by systems of frames, ideological language will activate that ideological system. Might be a single word or an entire concept, but synapses in neural circuits are made stronger the more they are activated. The repetition of ideological language strengthens the circuits for that ideology in a hearer's brain. Essentially what this means is that the louder you shout, the stronger they get. In short, you cannot avoid framing. It's happening now, and we're all products of it. The only question is whose frames are being activated and hence strengthened in the brains of the public. And so now from there, I was ready to launch into some form of neuro-linguistic programming that would ensure it was my frame. I wanted it to be mine. Trouble is, of course, that Scientology has that kind of thing pretty much wrapped up. Luckily, as I said, it didn't feel right. And while we might now subconsciously know that we might have fallen from our near godlike status to become nothing but simple, vulnerable robots, there is at least liberation in our common ground. Some comfort to knowing we're all alike in this, and perhaps some ethical grounding might be found in that. To me, that does feel better. I'm sure I've gone over, but apologies, I can't help myself. I'm going to leave it there. Any questions, insights or comments, please pop by calthepodcast.online. I look forward to the conversation, and I think next week, Spinoza. Wow, Spinoza. Thanks for listening.